Welcome back everyone. Today we are taking a look at the game between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Vidit Gujrathi from round 9 of the Tata Steel Masters. Nepomniachtchi is just half a point behind Carlsen and Anand heading into this round. So this would be a good opportunity for him to try and close the gap with the white pieces. Vidit is having a solid tournament so far, 4 out of 8, a very respectable score in a very strong field. So without further ado, let's jump into this game. Nepomniachtchi opens with e4, e5 from Vidit, knight f3, knight to f6, so Petrov defense from Vidit trying to play very solidly. Knight takes e5, d6, knight back to d3. So here the main move is knight f3, but Nepomniachtchi opts for the sideline. Queen to e2, queen e7, and knight to f4, so this is the novelty in the position. So white is freeing up his d-pawn to move, and also this knight has the option of coming into d5 to harass the queen, and also attack c7. So in this position, Vidit continued with his development, knight to c6. We have c3, preparing to establish central control with d4, knight to c5. d4 from Nepomniachtchi, queen takes e2, bishop takes e2, knight to e6, d5, knight takes f4, bishop takes f4, knight e5, and knight to a3. So perhaps more flexible than going knight to d2. So knight to a3 gives white the option of going knight b5 to attack c7. Also, white can play knight c2 to d4. So in this position, bishop to f5 played by Vidit. Black could also play a6 to stop knight to b5, but here Vidit opted for bishop f5. So Nepomniachtchi played knight to b5, attacking c7. So black can play king d7 to try and defend the pawn, but here Vidit decides to castle, giving up the a-pawn. But Vidit's idea here is to gain the bishop pair with knight d3 check. So here a4 played by Nepomniachtchi. So if knight to d4, I'm guessing Nepomniachtchi did not want to part so easily with his extra pawn. So here he first played a4, bishop to c4, white castled queenside, that also protects the d-pawn. We have bishop to b3. So rook d4 would protect a4 and d5 as well. But then there is bishop to e7. Black is threatening to play bishop to f6. And white's rook is starting to feel a bit clumsy. Black is also starting to get some coordination. His rooks are now connected. So in this position, Jan played rook to d2, giving up his extra a-pawn. Knight to d4, bishop e7, Vidit naturally tries to bring the bishop to f6, and b3. So this is Nepomniachtchi's idea to get counterplay down the a-file. This rook now has access to the a2 square. So here Vidit played bishop all the way back to e8. This seems a bit strange, denying the rook access to the e8 square. But maybe Vidit was a bit worried about white doubling rooks down the a-file. For example, if bishop to d7, and if black continues on with his development, then your rook h to a1, and the threat of rook to a8 is highly unpleasant. So at least bishop to e8 gives the king access to the d7 square. So Nepomniachtchi continued with rook to a2, bishop to f6, rook to d1, just protecting the knight. So Vidit, being more cramped in this position, decides to exchange pieces. Logical decision. Bishop d7 from Vidit, allowing the rook to come to e8. Black seems to be okay here, but Nepomniachtchi still manages to be very tricky. Here he plays c4. So let's play a waiting move for black just to see what white is intending. So here's c5, If that is taken, then d6. Giving up the rook. Well, not really giving up, because you can take on c7, forking the king and rook. But here, if the rook is taken, then rook a8 will be mate. So very dangerous idea from Nepomniachtchi. Let's just take a look at what happens if bishop b5. I'm just showing you this line because there is another variation where black is going to go bishop b5. But in this position here, rook b4 wins. If the bishop moves, say bishop to d7, then c6 is crushing. So here if c6, then d6 falls. So let's say bishop d7, c6, bishop c8. White doubles on the a file and it's just game over. So let's go back to the main position, c4. Rook h to e8 is also a possibility for black. So if c5, now bishop b5 works. So rook b4, black can try and trade off a pair of rooks to dull white's attack. Rook e1 check, and rook e2. And black is safe because white cannot double on the a file anymore. He only has a rook. So here bishop b5, the idea behind this move is that black is reinforcing the d6 pawn, and the bishop also supports a rook coming down to e2. If the pawn is taken, then here black has enough counterplay down the e file, and white has to play king d1 to stop rook e1. So rook h to e8 is a possibility for Vidit, but here Vidit goes for another alternative, b6, which is also good, keeping things solid and stopping c5. So Nepomniachtchi plays b4 in this position. And we have king to b7 from Vidit, and this is a slight inaccuracy from Vidit. Here rook over to e8 is completely fine for black. But king b7, this runs into c5, threatening c6, so that has to be taken. So c6 played here to stop this fork. If the pawn is taken, then rook b2, king c8, rook c4, preparing to capture on c5, and then c7 is going to be weak. So here Vidit played c6, that was b6 was taken, c takes d5, and bishop to e3, indirectly defending the b6 pawn. Already a very difficult position for Vidit. So if the king takes, then rook b4, this runs into a mating net. So after bishop to e3, let's say bishop to e6, trying to defend the pawn. This can run into something like rook a7 check, and rook to b4. And this b6 pawn is very dangerous, as white's bishop can come to f4 to cover the queening square. So after bishop to e3, Vidit tried rook to a8. Nepomniachtchi played rook a7. That was taken, and bishop c6, defending d5. So if king takes a7, then there's rook d5, followed by rook takes d7. So bishop c6, we have rook over to g4, attacking g7, rook g8 from black. So Vidit just hanging on in this position. King d2 from Nepomniachtchi, and here king c7. And this is actually the fatal mistake from Vidit. It was important to try and keep the king close to the pawn, because now Jan plays the move rook to b4, cutting off the king. So now white is threatening bishop f4 and then rook to b8. So Vidit plays bishop to b7, trying to cut off the white rook. But Nepomniachtchi finishes this off nicely. He plays bishop to b6 check, king to c6. So if king to c8, then rook to b5, threatening rook c5, king d7, then rook c7. So let's say king d7, then bishop to a5, attacking the bishop, and if bishop c6, then rook to b8 wins. So here king c6, bishop a5, and it was in this position that Vidit resigned. So black doesn't really have any good moves in this position. This king can't really move. It has to defend the bishop. And if the bishop moves, say bishop a8, then rook to b8 wins. So the only piece that can really move here is the rook. But after something like rook e8, comes rook to b6 check, king c7, then rook to g6, followed by picking up the pawn on g7. It's opposite colored bishops, but with the outside passed pawn, this is a win for white. White will soon gobble up one of these pawns, and this is going to be game over. So this win puts Nepo in the lead together with Anand and Carlsen, who both drew their games. So that is all for this video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.